right. So we're working through just one quick process of getting an illustration approved and merged into the SVG library. And I'll cover kind of the first half of just creating the issue and getting it added. Since I'm the one that'll be doing that, I won't approve it in this sense, but you'll see kind of how that workflow looks. And this illustration, this issue is adding a new empty state for, looks like, for requirements, which is going to be a new feature in the product. And Nick and I have worked through that. I've actually just reviewed his sketch file for the workflow and kind of approved, make sure that the design specs look good there. So that's something that you typically do on the front end before it becomes something that you add into the SVG library. And then once it's added, a reviewer there would then again just kind of review those specs and check the code side of things to make sure it gets added. So let's just I think my next step here is to actually create an MR. So let me just go ahead and do that. And can you see my screen all right?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Let's check out the branch. If you see me looking up, I've got a monitor above me, so I'm moving stuff in here. All right, so let's just go to, GitLab SVGs here. Oh, there we go. Oh, hold on. All right, so master branch here. Oops. What am I doing here? Sorry. There we go. And if I'm covering anything that is base, like, pardon me, sorry, I'm just going to walk through everything that I do. So, so typically after I create the MR, I'll just go ahead and copy this item for the terminal, paste it in there. So now that I've got that branch going, I'm going to actually take his file and add this to the library. So we'll go back to issue quickly. And I'm just going to download the sketch file. And I apologize, for a reviewer, you typically wouldn't have to do all this, right? Because the designer would be adding it and then you would just review it. But I'll just show you the kind of the whole workflow. So I've got his design, I've approved it. And what I'm going to do is just go ahead and just export it. And since I've got that branch checked out, I'm going to export it directly into the SVG project. There's an illustrations folder in there, and this is an empty state, so I also going to put it in that empty state folder. So without the background, we're actually going to do SVG. So we're dropping it in the empty states. I can see its requirements, empty state large, so it's all lowercase, hyphenated. That's one of the things I usually check when I review, is making sure that the actual file name kind of aligns with that. I'll probably change this so that it starts with empty. I find that makes it easier for search and just being able to navigate. So I'll leave the size in there. So empty, requirements large, SVG. Go ahead and add that. And then I jump over here. Let's see if I check the status that illustration's been added. And the process that we do for adding illustrations, if you haven't worked through it, is to just do yarn run SVG. And what this does is it'll optimize that file and put it in the dist folder. So
oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so we can run that. If we run git status again, we can see now that we've got the JSON files updated. That includes a reference to that illustration. We can see that the illustration's been added to dist, and that it's that the other one is added as well. So All right. Looks like I got something copy and pasted in there. And so what I'll do locally then is I'll also run dev, which creates a local instance of the file. And oftentimes I'll do this actually if I'm reviewing, I'll check out the branch and I'll do like the run dev and I'll just check it out locally. And when I do that, I can go to illustrations, I can search for empty and then requirements. Okay, so I can see that it's there. I notice here actually that, okay, you know what, there's no white background here. So that might be something in a review that I check that, you know, that actually should be part of that design. And in this case, I think it should be. So I'll just go back to the design. That's something that, like, you know, you might check if you are reviewing it locally. There's that background there. Sorry, I'll go back over here. There's this light gray background. In a future release, I'll probably remove that or provide an option to where you can change that. So in icons, we have this nice configure where we can change out the backgrounds. I think in illustrations, that would also be really helpful.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we'll go ahead and let's see here. It's got the gray 200. I'm just going to detach that for now and add a fill. All right, so we'll go ahead and now I can see that. I'm going to export that again. Empty requirements. Serial. All right, so back over in the terminal, I'll run yarn, the run SVG again. This will go through that same process. I can go ahead and do yarn run dev again. And let's see if I go over to here. Let me refresh this. All right, so now I can see requirements has the background. So that all looks good. I'll go ahead and we'll just close out of that. Check the status again. And then we'll go ahead and let's add all the changes. Do a commit message where we're adding requirements, empty state, library. Should probably add illustration here. All right, so we've added that. Push. Okay, so now I've got that up actually in the SVG library. I should be able to come over here. Let me get the zoom controls out of the way. Let's see if I can, there we go. So I'll refresh this, and now we should see that like the pipeline's running. It usually doesn't take too long for this. And this is where like a reviewer would kind of step in, right? Pipeline screen, you've been assigned a review. What I like to do is I initially just come over to the changes and see like what's been added, right? So in the dist folder, okay, the illustrations there, the SVG, everything's been compressed. I'll look at the JSON and just see, okay, there's just a simple addition that's happened. All right, so there's minor changes, right? The illustration count went by 1, so I know, okay, it's effective, there's 1 added. And I also see that the new one has been added in the empty state folder with the correct naming, and the size is just updated to that. I typically, you know, that's kind of an automated number, so not looking at that too much. And then the actual design, you know, I can see that that's been added into the non-dist folder. So I check through those. So that's kind of my, you know, initial step. In this case, what I'm going to do is, let's see here. I'll actually resolve the work in progress status. That's going. Let's just see here. Okay. Refresh so you can see that. And we'll give that a minute here. And then what happens is a review app will come up that I can actually take a look at. Let's just see, it's still chugging along. And what I'll do is I kind of do two-step, and it might be a bit redundant. What I like to do is actually view the review app, make sure that the edition is there and looks correct. And then I'll often, like I mentioned earlier, like check out the branch and review it locally, just to ensure that everything is tracking. So it's pretty simple, and that's generally my process for adding these. So from a visual standpoint, I'll go over to our guidelines, and for here, okay, I actually have the illustration open. I'll make sure like the colors are consistent. You notice there was green added in there, and that happened in a different a different issue recently where we discussed adding green so that we could indicate like a success state in an illustration. So this doc has to be updated probably with that green and adding to the palette, but I'll generally ensure that the illustration follows kind of the palette guidelines, the shape, stroke, border radius. If I notice that something looks too rounded, I might request that it gets dialed in. The sizing is the other major thing that I take a look at. So based on the original issue, I know that that one, here we go. Based on the original issue, I noticed that this is an empty state. It looks like it's probably the large, it's not the medium, based on the requirements. And so I'll make sure that, okay, do the dimensions for that fall within that? And does it look correctly? And if I go over into Sketch, I can see that indeed it is, the 240 by 212, which is for a large state, is less than the dimension. So I know it satisfies that. It's not going to be shrunk down in the UI or scaled down. And so that's basically what I review. I make sure that everything looks good in that regard. That shapes, elements that are used are consistent with other things in our library and how we use them in the product. And that is it. So pretty simple. You can see this pass now. So I'll pop up in the review app, jump over to illustrations, look for requirements again. I can see that it works. One of the things we don't really have is the ability to kind of scale it too well, but even in a quick test here, I could see that illustration is going to scale. There's some other issues with the actual SVG site that are causing some weird scaling problems, but that is the basic process. So that was actually a little bit of the process since I actually went through and added it here. But
yeah, that's great. And for the icons, it's basically the same process, only you apply our guidelines for iconography.
Definitely, and exactly. And then when I'm in the review app with icons, since we have this configuration thing, what I'll do is, I'll typically isolate the icon that I'm looking at, and I'll make sure that all the different tests and say, okay, the color changes. Okay, that's great. Let's change the size. Okay, so I know size and color. So all those attributes change correctly like they should. I know that in the past there's been some bugs where if there's an extra attribute in the SVG code, like fill equals none or something, it'll prevent the color overrides from happening. And this is why we added the configuration. It's a really good way to test it, and just to be sure that the icon will change color and do what we need it to. So
yeah, makes sense. Yeah. Awesome. Should we have another look at the pipeline?
Yeah, pipeline is passed. So, and that's why that review app was available. Yeah. And so I could see, one commit. I got all the changes. So there's not really not a ton to review. There are some that get a little more complex because adding a new illustration, a new icon creates a new release for this. What we try to do is kind of do a batch release, at least for icons. It doesn't always happen just because of timing and the need, but if there's like a larger effort, or I notice that there's several coming in at once, I might try to do a larger MR here just so that it's kind of done in a batch. And, you would just go through all the changes and just investigate each one, make sure that, that it's been added and that it looks correct. That it scales, color changes, all of that. So,
yeah,
but pretty straightforward, and that's where you have the ability to you know, it's primarily a visual change, but on the code side, you're just making sure there's no conflicts and everything looks good as well. So
Yeah. Awesome. That was super helpful. Thank you so much.
yeah.